Welcome to Face with me, Lauren Booth. In this programme we meet senior political figures and delve into the pressing issues of the day across the globe. My guest today is Baroness JennyTonge. Baroness Tonge has been a senior politician with the Liberal Democrat Party in the United Kingdom since 1997, often courting controversy for her views on the state of Israel. Baroness JennyTonge to Face. In 2003 you made your first trip to Palestine. After that you began to be highly critical of Israel's behaviour in Palestine. What did you see to shape your views?
Well, it's very interesting really, because that visit in 2003 was not just interesting, it was a life-changing experience. I mean, my life has never been the same since. Before that I'd made speeches as international development spokesman on poverty and deprivation, and I'd sometimes mention the West Bank and Gaza. But our party line was very balanced, a balanced view. You know, there is good and bad on both sides and we must keep a balanced view. I went out there to see for myself with Una King, who everyone remembers. And the one word that sums that visit up for me is humiliation. At every point in the West Bank, I saw people being humiliated, struggling to live a normal life, struggling to be cheerful about things, but being humiliated once, twice, 3 times a day by Israeli soldiers, by the restrictions on their lives, by the way they couldn't get their goods out easily, and it was just humiliation. Can I tell you one story that will illustrate it? Yes, we saw people pushed around at checkpoints and kept waiting for hours. In fact, we were kept waiting most of a day at the Eretz crossing, and the British consul had to come and rescue us in the end to take us back to Jerusalem. But there was one incident that summed it up for me, the humiliation. Our cab driver was asked to produce his papers at the checkpoint, which he duly did, very patient. The soldier doing the checking took the papers away, and we all sat in the car for the usual, you know, half an hour, 3/4 of an hour. I mean, nobody knows where the papers had gone. When he eventually came back, he said, "Okay," and shoved them at the driver. And as he shoved them, and I was in the back seat of the car behind him, I saw exactly what happened. He dropped them outside the car. So he, you know, deliberately made it difficult. So our driver, very patient, smiling man, gets out of the car and starts, it was a bit windy, starts catching his papers down on his hands and knees, picking up precious, precious ID papers. And as he did so, the guy got into a jeep and very nearly drove over his hands. Now, I really found that terribly shocking. It was something that just summed up the Israeli attitude to the Palestinians. Make them crawl, make them suffer, humiliate whenever you can, in this really nasty, insidious way. And we saw that time and time again during that week. We were also there when an attempted assassination of Dr. Rantisi occurred, and a helicopter gunship came into the centre of Gaza City and fired at the car they thought he was in. He actually escaped at that time. And he is a very well-respected doctor, as well as being a Hamas member. We saw the carnage and the collateral damage that was done then, and the people that were injured. And it just made me so angry that the Israelis, having been given this wonderful opportunity of some land of their own, after the early years couldn't have made it really, really good for everyone living in that area. Why didn't they see? I think in the Balfour Declaration even, it said you must do no harm to the people who live there at the moment. In other words, it was never envisaged in the Balfour Declaration that people would be driven at gunpoint out of their homes and houses would be flat.
In 2004, you made a controversial statement. You said that if you had grown up in Palestine and you were under constant humiliation, you would understand being a suicide bomber. The media then called for your leadership to remove you from your post. What happened?
Well, I made that statement at a meeting to try and express just how I felt, because the constant humiliation that's gone on for decades in Palestine, even after a week, I was feeling depressed and angry and humiliated myself. And I felt if I was in that situation, trying to bring up my family, and that happened every day, as I was struggling to make a living and struggling to make the children feel good about themselves and good about their future, I might, if I'd been a Palestinian and if I'd been a Muslim, which of course I'm neither of those things, have considered being one myself, actually. I think that's what I...
So what's the difference between saying you understand the impulse of the suicide bomber and encouraging terrorism on the Jewish population?
I had any intention whatsoever to promote acts of terror. I just said I could understand where people were coming from. And it is absolutely useless condemning acts of terrorism, like called suicide bombing, without actually going to the very roots and understanding why they do it. Because they're not going to stop doing it unless you understand the reasons. And I, as a doctor, am very used to putting myself inside a patient's skin and thinking, how does this patient actually feel about what is the real problem?
Do you ever regret that statement?
Saying it at all. I think it made people, a lot of people from all over the world. I had nearly 9,000 letters and emails on that occasion, and about 80% were supportive.
You said that Charles Kennedy, your leader at the time, was under pressure from external sources. What did you mean by that?
He telephoned me and said that I must apologise, and I said, apologise for what? I was just expressing a feeling. And how can you actually apologise? How can you withdraw words that you've spoken? That is a nonsense, and I refused to do that. And so he said, well, then I'm going to have to remove you from the front bench. And I just said, well, do whatever you have to do. He was under pressure from the Israel lobby, which in later years I discovered was very, very active in all political parties in this country. And as we all know, it practically runs American foreign policy.
On what grounds do you make the assertion that there is an Israel lobby controlling foreign policy? On what basis do you say that?
No, I wouldn't say it was foreign policy here, but I think it has a huge influence on the thinking of politicians, even in this country. If you've read the book in America by Professors Walton Mearsheimer called The Israel Lobby, and you translate it into a minor form is happening in Britain, every political party in this country, the three major political parties, have a big organisation called Friends of Israel, which are affiliated to them. There have been television documentary programmes made in this country about the influence those groups have on individual politicians and the party as a whole.
You say the Israel lobby is powerful. In what way? Is it financial control over the political system?
It's nothing wrong in anything they do. Other lobbies exist. I mean, don't think I'm just singling it out. Other lobbies exist, but it's working hard for your candidate of whatever party, making yourself indispensable, delivering leaflets, holding dinner parties, fundraising, all the things that people do within a political party, the Friends of Israel do superbly, and there is nothing illegal about it, and there is no reason why they shouldn't. I am just saying that they have been overly influential in the past. I'm glad to say in my party, it does not happen. If it happened in the past, it certainly doesn't happen under our present leader.
Cherie Blair, former Premier Tony Blair's wife, also said that she understood suicide bombers and then was made to make a very fast retraction. What does this say about the state of freedom of speech in political circles, that you can't talk about a Palestinian resistance in any form?
I think it's very sad. And I don't know why people feel so threatened. I think we should all be a little bit more frank in what we say. I was totally approved of what Cherie Blair said on that occasion. I was just sad that she retracted her statement. I wish she'd said, no, that's how I felt, that's what I meant. And I think we should all seek to understand where these people are coming from and not just condemn them outright.
You've made several trips to Gaza, and on several of these you've chosen the activism route. You've gone, for example, with the Free Gaza mission by sea. Why not take the normal route that MPs take?
Well, that was, on the last few occasions, I've been with a European-wide campaign called the Campaign to End the Siege of Gaza, which is a conglomeration of about 10 NGOs all over Europe, including the Palestine Return Centre in London. And they wanted to get as many British politicians and European politicians, I correct myself, European politicians, out to Gaza to actually see for themselves what was going on. They made that the main aim of the organisation, is to get politicians out there. The first time I went with them, we were going through the famous, infamous Rafah crossing from Egypt, but we were refused permission. And on that occasion there was, I think there were about 15 politicians from the UK Parliament, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and there was a Swiss, I think, as well. There was a smaller group of us. And we couldn't get in through Rafah, and it was suggested that we went on the boat Dignity, run by the Free Gaza movement, and we said yes.
Isn't that a politically charged statement, getting on an activism boat that wants to break a blockade put on by an ally of Britain?
Of course we want to break a blockade. Of course we want to break the blockade.
It's a blockade that the British government
people in Gaza. Well, I'm sorry, I do not agree with the British government policy. It is absolutely appalling that the people of Gaza are suffering in the way that they are. And I have gone, I mean, if you want the details, I will give you the details of the children in Gaza who are malnourished, their growth is stunted, they're badly psychologically affected, they have post-traumatic stress disorder. A huge proportion of them got bedwetting, they can't concentrate at school. Because of the blockade, a whole generation of children are being made into weak, poorly educated and emotionally disturbed adults. That is the next generation that Israel is going to have to deal with. And I would just like to know what Western governments are doing supporting Israel in this policy when they know that they are doing that to little children. It is quite scandalous. So I don't mind breaking the blockade. I don't mind going against government policy. They can do what they like.
Just asked the question, what is the British and the US government doing in regards to Israel? You've been in the political hierarchy in the UK for 13 years. You tell us.
Number one, they are kowtowing to the United States of America, which we always do in this country. We seem to follow America. And secondly, they are going along with Europe, and there are European countries like Germany who are absolutely terrified of anti-Semitism. I mean, we haven't mentioned that word yet, but it drives policy because of the Holocaust, which I think personally, and I've read a lot about it, was one of the, no, I think it was the worst thing that mankind has ever perpetrated on other human beings. It was incredible for its brutality and overall its organisation and its documentation. I mean, they made a whole industry out of torturing and killing people. People in Europe, certain countries, Germany in particular, of course, are overwhelmingly guilty about that and terrified of having anti-Semitism levelled at them. And therefore that also, as well as adhering to American policy, American foreign policy, which is run by the Israel lobby, according to Walter Mearsheimer, those two factors mean that we do what we do. And I think it's very, very short-sighted, and it's very, very short-sighted of Israel to think that that country has any long-term future at all if it carries on like this, because sooner or later they're going to...
Your stance on Israel has been questioned by colleagues within your own party. For example, JennyTonge's original support for suicide bombers in Israel got her sacked from the front bench. I think her vulgar repetition and rhetoric means that her position within the party needs to be seriously reviewed. Your support for the people of Gaza and Palestine as a whole has brought you controversy and criticism from within your own party. Did they ruin your career in politics? Are they career ruiners in British politics?
I'm not a career politician. I never was. My career was in medicine, in the National Health Service. That's what I was trained as. I was trained as a doctor. And I went into politics because I was interested in seeing whether you could improve people's lives more by being a politician than by being a doctor, because quite often the doctors can treat physical ailments but they can't actually change the conditions in which people live, and that's what really troubles them. So that's why I went into politics. I went into politics because there were things I wanted to talk about, things I wanted to do. I had no intention whatsoever of climbing up the greasy pole of politics. You know what an African politician once said to me when I was visiting out there? That the more the monkey climbs up the coconut palm, the more you can see of his backside. That's career politicians.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Palestinian politics. In 2008 and 2009, you made trips to Gaza and to Damascus for talks with Khaled Mashal and Ismail Haniyeh of Hamas. Neither of these moves were approved in British political
Approved
circles.
by my party. My party thinks we should talk to Hamas.
Is this a new line that your new leader Nick Clegg has taken?
Yes, probably, but certainly we've called for talks with Hamas officially. You know, I mean, the official line of the Liberal Democrats is that we should engage with all parties in this dispute. That it's okay talking to Fatah and listening to Fatah, but like we talked to the IRA when we were trying to settle the Northern Ireland question, of course we should be talking to Hamas. They were the legitimate elected government of the Palestinians 3 years ago. They were given 48 hours before they were totally rejected by the world. Now, I have no idea what sort of a fist Hamas would have made of running the government of Palestine, but they weren't even given the chance. 100 days would have been all right, but 48 hours.
Are representatives of the British government now meeting with Hamas in secret, do you think?
I have no idea, and I've not heard. I just hope that they are. I hope that they are. There's no evidence that they are at the moment, because the messages that we have had consistently, it's not just me, it's politicians of all parties have met the Hamas leaders. It's not just me. We get a very, very different message from Hamas consistently than the one that is put out with the propaganda.
What were your meetings like with Ismail Haniyeh and with Khaled Mashal?
Khaled Mashal and Ismail Haniyeh have a consistent line. They have been asked to give up violence. They have. They do. If you remember, before Operation Cast Lead, they had given up firing rockets. Violence had been given up for 6 months until the Israelis came over the border and killed a few people, when some hotheads then fired rockets back into Israel. They have done it since Operation Cast Lead. There have been very few rockets fired into Israel. But Israel, you know, is still coming over with the helicopter gunships. They killed 6 people a couple of weeks ago. And they are doing the sonic boom thing that so terrorizes the children. That's happening again. So they say, we have given up violence. And where has it got us? They have also proposed that they will have a long-term truce for 10 years. But they do put a time limit on it, because people who are oppressed and occupied actually want to see some results for their truce. They have no means of resistance, so they've got to see some results.
What do you have to say to people who regularly read in the British and American press that the Hamas leadership wants to wipe Israel off the map and drive the Jewish nation into the sea? That must be a message that you've heard from
Yes,
them.
of course. And we have actually put that to them. And they say, Israel exists. It's on the map. What is this nonsense about, you know, we want to drive them into the sea or they shouldn't exist? It's there, it's a fact, it's been there for 60 years, we know that, we're not stupid. What we want is a Palestine based on the 67 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. They are quite unequivocal about that, but that is the basis for talks, plus they will give up violence, plus they will adhere to those agreements that Fatah may have made with outside bodies while they have been running the show over the last 2 years, but they reserve the right to actually change them if possible. Hamas have many, many faults, but the messages that go out officially about Hamas are not the messages we are being told by Khalid Mashal and Ismail Haniyeh.
What do you think of the Foreign Secretary David Miliband's attempt to overturn Britain's international treaty obligations with regard to war criminals visiting the United Kingdom?
I think he's a fool. I honestly think he's a fool. And I think one of the sadnesses of British politics is that you suddenly have a young man who, I'm sure he's a very nice young man, who really previously has not been in foreign affairs. He certainly hasn't done any international development, and I think that all foreign ministers should actually see how the 2/3 of the world live before they start dealing with that third of the world that lives in affluence, and that's called foreign policy. He hasn't got the experience, so he comes at it with a perspective of, you know, we must be balanced and we must be conciliatory and there is a way through this. I don't think that he has enough experience to do the job. I think there are people in the Foreign Office probably who've got far more experience, but they're not being listened to. But there are people talking to Hamas of all 3 parties, and we have been, I'm not saying official
individual
ministers.
MPs and not
individual
representatives of the British
MPs,
government yet?
MPs and peers, certainly members of the Labour Party, one member of the Conservative Party, and several Liberal Democrats have now talked to the Hamas leaders. And what we are trying to secure at the moment, but it's proving quite difficult, but we have got a date fixed in February, is to talk to one of the ministers in the Foreign Office, Ivan Lewis, who is the minister at the moment. He has promised that he will have a meeting with those people who have met Hamas. So it's a great leap forward, but it's a little step.
Do you see a time in the near future when Hamas is accepted as a political party, a legitimate political party, in the way that the IRA Sinn Féin is now regarded as a legitimate party?
Well, you know, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. When I was a little girl, we were terrorised by the Mau Mau in Kenya. led by a man called Jomo Kenyatta. And we used to hear of the terrible things that the Mau Mau did to people and the terrorist activities in Kenya. I think the royal family sent a representative to Jomo Kenyatta's funeral, and he was a very good leader of his country for many, many years. So I don't have any truck at all with this label of terrorist, because the way people behave under oppression, under occupation, can be very, very different from the way they behave when they're given responsibility for government. And at the moment, the Palestinians are not being given the chance.
Tonge, thank you very much. You've been watching Face to Face with me, Lauren Booth. My guest has been Baroness JennyTonge. We'll be back at the same time next week with more high-profile political debate. See you then.